By show of hands, if you would, as those of you that have heard of biodiesel or bioheat. Oh my goodness, that's wonderful. Thank you. Now by a show of hands, and don't be bashful, as New Yorkers we're not, how many think that biodiesel or bioheat has a positive impact on our society? Okay. Now, as typical New Yorkers we all are, how many of you think that it might be detrimental to our society? Good. Okay. Well, hopefully by the time, in my short 13 minutes left, I will help persuade you or give you a little more information to weigh both sides. And if not, on September 20th, there is going to be a conference or workshop to talk about the advantages and disadvantages and what is happening with biodiesel and bioheat. So there's a few messages that I want to get across to you tonight in the limited time that I have. And the first one is that, yes, biodiesel is bioheat. The only reason why we call bioheat and not biodiesel is because over the last few years, biodiesel has been used in our heating fuel infrastructure. So it's being used in heating your residential home. It's being used to heat commercial buildings. It's being used in gensets for power generation. And the reason why bioheat versus biodiesel is because consumers couldn't wrap their arms around using biodiesel in their heating system. So that's why it's bioheat. So when you hear me talk about biodiesel and bioheat, you know it's all biodiesel. The interesting thing about biodiesel today and bioheat and why it did get started a few years ago is because, 20 years ago, farmers had excess agricultural crops, soybeans and canola, and they wanted to have a new market for it. And over 100 years ago, this guy, Renewable Diesel, was using vegetable oil in diesel engines, and we got away from it because of the inexpensive cost of diesel fuel. But also very important today, as we all look to reduce our carbon footprint, as we all look to be more sustainable and reuse our waste streams, especially here in the New York City area, we do have many waste streams, such as used cooking oil. How many of you own or work in a restaurant?
Yes.
Okay. How many of you eat at a restaurant? How many of you cook at home? So, but when you cook at home, you're eating in a restaurant. What's unique about New York City is that we have to use canola or soy-based cooking oil today versus other parts of the country. And that is an excellent feedstock to produce biodiesel and bioheat. So we use them on waste streams. There's a renewable fuel standard by the EPA that says that refiners must use a certain percentage of feedstocks in gasoline and diesel fuel to reduce that carbon footprint. And if they do not use it, they have to buy these credits, which is almost like a cap and trade. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. In New York State, we know about, some of us know about, the state has an energy plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2050. We all know about Plan YC and the mayor's objectives. In October of 2012, in the city of New York, there's a legislation whereby people that are using heating oil now, commercial or residential, must use a B2 blend. A B2 blend is 2% biodiesel, bioheat, and 98% heating oil. And I'll tell you a little more about that as well. We are phasing out 4 and 6 oil. Over the next couple of decades, you're not going to be able to burn 6 oil anymore or 4 oil. So we have a transition to that where you'll have to move to ultra-low sulfur heating oil as well as natural gas. And also in New York City, in the state of New York, there's what's called a bioheat residential tax credit. So if you have an apartment building where people are using as their residence, or you have a single family or 4-family home, there is a tax credit that you can take off your yearly taxes, in New York State, and it's 1 cent per percent of bioblend. So if you use a B20, which is 20% biodiesel and 80% heating oil, and you use 1,000 gallons a year, so that's 20% of that 1,000. So whatever you paid for that 200 gallons, so if you pay $3 a gallon, that's $600 you can take off your taxes in New York State. Additionally, if you are a state agency or a state authority, for the last 5 years, you had to use some bioheat blend in your facility as well, as part of the governor's executive order. Now, really, what are the benefits of biodiesel? And keep in mind, when you think about biodiesel, it's used cooking oil, or it's soybeans, or canola, or some other feedstock stream. So when you blend it with distillate, and when I say distillate, that means heating oil or diesel fuel, you are reducing the quantity or displacing that distillate that you're burning or consuming. So whether you use a 2% blend, or a 20% blend, or a 50% blend, you're displacing that distillate, so you're reducing the carbon in the fuel, you're reducing emissions. But even more importantly today, that bioheat and biodiesel is really the only commercially available fuel today that you can substitute for diesel fuel and heating oil today. And it's widely available in New York City, in the 5 boroughs of New York City. And it's basically just a drop-in fuel for small percentages of bio. So B2, B5, even up to a B20 for most parts of the year. In other parts of the country, and even here, you can use up to a B50 and a B100, but if you use much higher blends, you will have to do some retrofitting on your equipment. So that's very important to know. So biodiesel comes from soybeans, it comes from used cooking oil. So, next time you go to a restaurant, ask them what they do with used cooking oil. If it's a large or a medium-sized restaurant, if it's Madison Square Garden or Catering Hall or City Field or Yankee Stadium, in most cases it's being picked up and it's being picked up, being recycled and going through the trans-esterification process. Now, there's a lot of people out there that have diesel vehicles, like a Passat or some other car, and they start thinking, well, I'm going to go pick up this used cooking oil and take it, and I'm going to put it into my vehicle. You can't do that. If you do, and the EPA finds out, it's $32,500 per day per incident fine, and you could